even if you took a chimpanzee and you put it at a poker table for the first time and you taught it the rules of the game, it would probably figure out that you shouldn't bet half pot with pocket threes here. So what the red line is going to do, guys, is it's going to track how much money we win or lose not at showdown. So the losses are going to be times that we fold, and the wins are going to be times that we make our opponents fold. This is a very typical microstakes player's graph. This was sent to me by someone who's applied for my new YouTube series, which is going to be taking someone from being a really losing player to hopefully being a very winning player, and we're going to follow the journey. Stay tuned for that here on Carrot Corner Poker Education. But this graph is really typical. I would say probably 4 out of 5 people who come to me for coaching or buy the school and then join the Discord and post their results and sort of show us where they are, they're having problems like this where the red line is just absolutely jumping off a cliff. It's just completely plummeting. What this student needs to do is fix this urgently. This is like basically a hemorrhage of money that's just not going to stop unless you drastically change your game. Showing up at the tables and playing the way that you've been playing for the last 6 months or a year is just going to lead to more plummeting red line. And when the red line is dive bombing like this, it literally becomes impossible to win. What we see here is that the blue line is slowly plodding along, making some money. That's going to happen when you're avoiding too many acts of aggression, acts of calling, when you're folding too much, when you're just basically being too passive, placid, agreeable. That's what causes red line issues more often than not, right? Because you end up folding too often. The ratio of you folding to making your opponents fold is not in your favor. You want that to be much more in your favor. That said, we don't fix this just by mindlessly starting to club people to death with aggression. We do need to have a bit of common sense about where that's going to be a good idea. So today's video is going to show you 5 ways in which you can really fix this. If you have a graph like this, keep watching. This is the video for you. We are going to fix this extremely common plague today, and hopefully restore the red line of all of you guys and get that green line up. The only way we can get that green line up to 0, breaking even, is going to be by stabilizing the red line. It doesn't necessarily have to be winning. We don't have to be red line crushers. There's nothing inherently sexier about a red line than a blue line, if you ask me, but the red line is just the common symptom of a student that has a lot of misunderstandings about where they can and can't apply aggression, where they can and can't call. Basically, they're risk adverse. And it's not usually a conscious choice to be that risk adverse. It's usually just that the student is inherently seeing demons, monsters under the bed, isn't understanding pot odds, isn't really getting the fact that investing money with risk, with the chance that you're often going to lose that money, is very often the correct play in poker. So let's get into it. Let's deal with 5 points today that are going to help you fix your red line. This is not exhaustive. I can't give you every single fix possible in today's video. We do a lot of that at the Carrot Poker School. We have a grade E and exploitative course that will really help with this, that's running this September. Do check it out with the link in the description. But until then, these points will definitely help you stabilize if you suffer from this. So let's get started on them. Guys, I really think that poker has been a badly taught subject for a long time. So many courses, training sites out there that give you an absolute medley of different random content day after day. There's no structure, there's no organization. You're jumping from one thought to another by following along with a live play session. There's almost nothing that's created in a pre-prepared academic way, and that's why I was so incentivized to bring you the Carrot Poker School. Not only do we use presentations to make sure that all ideas are actually translated into concepts, figures, graphics and hand examples and give you the right amount of each, but we also make sure that the syllabuses of our courses flow from episode to episode, not moving at a pace that you guys can't handle. The Carrot Poker School is fully comprehensive. It takes you from the start to the end. By the time you've completed grade 3, there's really nothing that you don't know about the theory of cash game poker. This is so much more efficient than just watching training content from a subscription site that bombards you with random stuff every day. The Carrot Poker School will make sure that you learn at the right pace and that there's absolutely nothing missing in your game. We do not bombard you with extra information that you don't need. We just give you everything you need, and that's a lot, and that's why the Carrot Poker School is 33 hours long. We lead you down the path to success gradually and carefully, making sure that you get feedback every step of the way. This is a revolutionary course, guys. I'm incredibly proud to have brought it to you, and you can check it out over at carrotcorner.com. You can save £500 today by picking up our full scholarship and learning cash game poker the right way. Point number one that's really going to help you stabilize the red line is to prey on weak checking ranges. One of the biggest epidemics of the microstakes that you're going to see, not just in your own game but from your opponents as well, is their tendency to really underprotect checking ranges. It's just not intuitive to do so. When you've not done a lot of study in GTO, it can be hard to understand why checking a decent or good hand is actually okay, and the natural tendency is to just build bulky, strong, value-heavy betting ranges, because if I could say two things about microstakes players, I would say that they don't bluff enough with low equity in favourable spots for their range, more on this later, and they also don't go for slow plays, check raises out of position. They don't understand that a good hand that's not great can just bet the flop, then check the turn, then bet the river, or maybe even check twice and then bet the river at some frequency. They don't understand that you get money from your opponent's bluffs by checking, so it's okay to sacrifice some protection and some value in some cases, or delay that value until later. So what this really all culminates in is that people are going to be underprotected when they check. I'm going to show you a hand that's a really good example of this now. So all of the hands I show you are just hands I've played this month at 200 zoom. You may say, well, is this happening at 200 zoom? Yes, it actually is. You know, some of the less crushing regs at 200s exhibit these leaks. The opponents that you will encounter at 25, 10, 50 NL, 5 NL, whatever you play, are going to be exhibiting these leaks even more. So here's a cool hand. We have ace 5 of hearts here. And on the flop of Jack 10-7, I will show you a pile sim for this in just a second, and you'll actually see that the solver is going to be probably okay with our line, but our line is nevertheless going to be taken exploitatively. I'll show you what I mean. This is a really cool concept that we can do something that the solver doesn't mind, yet it's still exploitable. And the reason is it's the frequency we're doing it that matters. So Jack 10-7 is a neutral board. It's a board that really equalizes the range advantage. And in grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School, there's a lecture that's all about understanding range and nut advantage and how to pair these concepts together to figure out how to play the flop. But for now, let's just gloss over this by saying that we wouldn't have a massively high bet frequency on Jack 10-7 two-tone. The reason being it just allows an equity catch up here for the big blind somewhat by neutralizing a lot of the unique hands we had pre-flop at the top of our range. Nut advantage wise, that's the other factor that's a building block of strategy. That's also eroded a bit here. So I think using a small bet, half pot bet, whatever you want to do here, is totally fine at a low frequency. And overall, this is one of the hands in our range that I think is going to be checking a lot more than other holdings. We do check back on the flop here. One reason I quite like this sort of flop check behind against a weaker player on this kind of board is that oftentimes they're going to show you what they have on these wet boards on the turn. They're going to lead way too many of their one pair hands. They're going to lead way too many of their draws. They're not going to go for check raises enough. They're not going to make your life difficult. So when they check again here, given that they're over leading all their value hands and they're probably quite timid to bluff without decent equity a lot of the time, not everyone, you know, some people are going to be maniacal here and just lead everything. You take the rough with the smooth in that respect when you check back here. But yeah, basically it's fine to check back. You get to see what's up. But when you land on this node where the checking range is just very underprotected, you can basically claim that the fold equity you're getting, that's the percentage of the time your opponent folds to your delayed c-bet, your turn bet here that I end up making, is going to be way higher than it would be in equilibrium. You'll also note that I pick a kind of funky sizing here. I use a slight overbet. This is a sizing I use only against recreational players because it basically looks much bigger than it is. It's more than the pot. When you glance at this and your visual processing mind takes it in, you kind of go, whoa, that's a really big sizing. I don't want to call that with my pair of sixes or my king 7 or whatever villain has here. He could also just have absolutely nothing, of course, like a hand like 6-8 and just be folding some terrible gutter or something. But the point is that this bet is supposed to yield, well, we'll see what the solver thinks in a minute about most turn sizings, but they're meant to yield a certain amount of fold equity in game theory, and my whole gambit here is that it's going to yield more because of how villain has landed on this decision point, how they've failed to protect their checking range, how they've led too many of their value hands, how they're not going for sneaky, tricky, trappy check raises often enough. This is really my whole gauntlet here that I'm laying down. It does get through on this occasion, but the reason this is a deviation is that while it is okay to bluff, you know, fairly freely in this spot, like it is a favorable world for your range when villain checks again on the turn, it's not amazing, and it's not a spot where you should just be able to go willy-nilly bet all of the time for an overbet with ace 5 of hearts. If you're doing that, you can imagine what happens to your betting range, right? We would have bet a lot of our sets, straights, things like that on the flop and overpairs at a high frequency, so we don't have millions of value hands for this sizing to play about with. We do have lots of bluffs, so if we do lose control here, we're over bluffing, but that's exactly what we should do. You should be over bluffing. That's by far the highest EV strategy against a recreational player who checked twice because they're going to be over folding. Let's take a look in the solver and just see how we can compare this play to a GTO recommendation and then argue for it as a deviation from the solver's recommendation from the GTO. So I haven't even looked at this sim yet, I've just ran it now and we'll see what we find. So check on the flop, you can see that there's a relatively high bet frequency on the flop, but not a lot. But when we look at a hand like ace-5 of hearts, we can see that the bet frequency for this hand is considerably lower than it would be for the rest of our range. So we can bet or we can check here, it's not really a big deal. I'd recommend betting this against people who are going to lead turn totally randomly and kind of ruin your day. I would also recommend checking this though against people who are going to play more transparently. I think that's the main player type dichotomy there that we need to be aware of. So we do go ahead and check back, and the turn comes the 4 of clubs. Now I'd just like to show you how villains should be playing these spots. The correct strategy in GTO terms is that villains should be using a very large sizing. This deep purple shade here that we see in villains turn probe, that's what this is called. Range is going to be the B150, that's 150% of the pot. Why is that? Well, it's because we've capped our range, handing the nut advantage over to our opponent in this spot. What's going to happen in reality here is that they won't use the sizing. They'll bet more often than this, probably. They'll bet more merged than this. They'll bet more like single pair hands. Look at how often a hand like Jack 8 is meant to check here. Queen Jack, King Jack, Ace Jack. There's a lot of slow playing still happening with these hands because villain is not in a situation where they have to rush value betting. They can check raise, they can check call, they can get value from a different part of our range by checking as they can by betting. There is no reason on earth why you have to bet Ace Jack here, yet that's how people usually play. So if way too many of these made hands that you can see the solver is green, you know, checking with here, if they're betting them all the time, inherently these hands are not in the checking range often enough. The checking range is thus getting really weak. Even nutted hands here like pocket 7s, pocket 10s are meant to do a lot of slow play on this node, especially with the spade blocker there, just making it more likely that we have a terrible hand that doesn't have a flush draw with it, and therefore there's less protection going on, etc. When villain bets there, the less useful fold equity, whatever. The point is that villain is going to be slow playing tons and tons of their range here in GTO. If villain finds the slow play with tons and tons of their range, we're still allowed to bluff with ace-5 of hearts because our range is in a good spot. There is no real equity requirement in a spot like this within reason. With any hand, for the most part, you can just go ahead and bet here. It doesn't really matter, and the reason for that is that your fold equity, say you overbet here, which is something the solver is doing. This is a larger overbet than the one I used, but say we go for this. What's going to happen is that you get 64% fold equity. You only need 60% to break even, so this is inherently just very profitable. But it's so much better against someone who doesn't have set slow playing, who doesn't have Queen Jack, who even leads a 10 sometimes. The way recreational players actually play this spot in reality is that they build a completely underprotected checking range that actually is just a sitting duck for aggression. What's the true fold equity, do you think, guys, when I make this play? Probably like 80%. 85%, something huge and completely unjustified, but this is what poker is. Poker is not a game of, as the chat pros would like you to believe, copying solved ranges and trying to be as close to Pio as possible. If you're trying to be Pio here, you're throwing away money because you're not taking all that free red line money. So if I see a student with a plummeting red line, one of the first things I'm going to do with that person is say, hey, are you taking advantage of cap checking ranges? Because they are everywhere, my friend. They're all over the place. Start destroying them, buddy. Start doing it, you know? Start pillaging these people. It's what they deserve. They're sitting ducks. Take their money. All right, let's move on to number 2. Point number 2 is that we should be lurking, waiting like this crocodile to snap off bets from unfiltered ranges. What does this mean? What is an unfiltered range, and how can calling wide against one really save your red line from this disaster we saw at the start? Well, an unfiltered range is one that hasn't gone through a transitionary period where it's shrunk in combinatoric width, so it's not got rid of any of its combos. It's still just similar to what it was before. Maybe it's weaker because it didn't lead out or something like that. So in the following hand, you're going to see what I mean. Villain's range is very unfiltered, or it's very capped and just sort of very likely that it contains mostly bad hands when it lands on the node in question, when it lands on a betting opportunity. So let's take a look at this hand. This is a really instructive one. So we have another ace-5 offsuit hand here. We are on the button, we open to 2.5x, and we get called by a recreational player in the big blind. We decide to check back this time with ace-5. We can also just go ahead and bet here at some frequency, but I think this is going to be one of the higher frequency checks. I don't really have a massive preference for this though. You can get lost in the weeds with that kind of thing very easily. On the turn, I think our hand is clearly what I call tier 4 in the Carrot Poker School Grade 2 lecture. 3 is going to show you all about how to tier your hand, categorizing it so that you know roughly how much equity it has and therefore what it's allowed to do and not allowed to do. This hand is not allowed to bet, it's just too good. It's not bad enough to bluff. It's a very firm middle of range situation, and you make a big polarization error by betting here. Even though your opponent is overfolding this spot, that doesn't give you license to bet everything. We saw a delayed CBet last time where I was betting ace high, and I would do the same here. I would bet a lot here with ace 8, king jack, any kind of hand that was lacking showdown value. We're going to clean up here against a recreational player, as we've already seen, but this hand doesn't need to do that. It's just doing too well by checking. And one of the reasons it's doing so well by checking is that this bet here, this random lazy half-pot stab on the river by villain, is one of the most overbluff things you're going to see. If you take grade E of the Carrot Poker School in September, you will be taught tons of spots like this where you can absolutely brutalize the competition. Get in touch with me if you're looking to sign up for that. Add me on Discord, click the link in the description. Whatever, we'll show you how to book your place in that course. But what that course does is it shows you spots like this, spots where villain is leading, in a situation where their range has remained completely unfiltered. Villain's range has at no point jumped through any hoops where they've had to eliminate their air. Okay, they could have bluffed on the turn with some of their air, but they'll also be value betting the turn really frequently, right? So when they reach this river spot, before they make the bet, we call this their landing range in the Carrot Poker School, the range they get to this betting opportunity with. This is drowning in king high, queen high, ace high, jack high, just drowning in air still. It's button versus big blind. They have led too many of their good hands on the turn. They have not protected their checking range for getting there, and now they're betting a size that's claiming to us, because we are meant to meet our MDF, our minimum defense frequency, in this particular spot, because we have a range advantage here still, or we're doing okay range wise. So we're not overfolding this spot, we're not having to get rid of lots of our range or anything like that. So villain is basically saying, you need 25% equity, Pete. You need 25% equity to call me. That means that I'm making sure that I'm only bluffing a quarter of the time. 3-to-1 value to bluff ratio is what villain's range needs to be deploying here in order to make us indifferent. What are the chances that villain's range, landing on this spot with absolute crap all the time, just dog shit constantly, is able to control the bluff to value frequency such that they're only bluffing 25% of the time? Basically zero. If you fold this spot, this is why your red line is eating itself alive. This is why you're not winning at poker. Folding this spot is absurdly terrible. It's absolutely awful. This is an absolute no-brainer snap call once you see what's going on, because hands like this is just unfathomable, right? Threes is just completely ridiculous, like total polarization error. I don't know what this guy's smoking, but like, even if you took a chimpanzee and you put it at a poker table for the first time and you taught it the rules of the game, it would probably figure out that you shouldn't bet half pot with pocket threes here, I would think. But anyway, this human has done exactly that, and the reason is that they have no idea how to play the game. And not only do we beat every combo of queen high, king high, all the air that got here, but they're also just leading randomly with the middle of their range, and we beat those hands too. We beat ace queen, we beat ace jack, we beat threes, we beat deuces, we beat fours, we beat all this stuff. We have a bluff catcher but also a merge catcher, and villain is over bluffing and over merging, so we have to call here. If you fold here, you've thrown away multiple big blinds. Is that severe? Let's move on. Point number 3 is triple, triple, triple. I've not had a massive breakfast today, and this was a mistake. I mean, okay, the tomatoes are definitely cut too thick on this triple cheeseburger, but man, it still looks all right, I have to say. I really want to stress this, that if you get carried away with this and you do it in the wrong spots, it can be harmful for you, but generally, pool is overfolding to triple barrels mostly. Like most weaker players, kind of average regs at 25 NL, that sort of pedigree of player, are folding too much against the third barrel. So you usually want to err on the side of making that bet unless you have like very bad blockers, or you know, you've got a bad image against that player, or the texture is just an underfolded one. It's hard to learn all of these patterns, but I'm going to show you a hand which should help you identify just a bread and butter spot to go ahead and triple barrels. So 10-9 of hearts here. I played this hand a long time ago. I was digging about here trying to find the best example I could for the most mundane bread and butter triple spot, and I think this is a good one. So we 3-bet here in the small blind against cutoff. Big blind decides to call. This is a very bizarre situation actually, so it's probably not so bread and butter, but definitely the theme here is the run out and just the general situation and thinking a bit about villain's range. So here we go ahead and bet small. The queen comes on the turn and we bet small again, and then we have the opportunity to shove this river. Now, inherently, this kind of play is going to be fairly profitable. It's going to be a little bit winning whenever your blockers are favorable. Our blockers are okay here. They're not tremendous. We do block 10s and 9s, which are hands that could be folding. but we unblock busted clubs, we unblock things like ace-3 suited if that's ever doing that, and there's just a lot of pocket pair here that villain is cold calling to the 3-bet pre-flop. So I think this kind of spot, a lot of people don't like pulling the trigger, and the reason they don't like it is that they're going to get called often, and this is really true, but getting called often isn't enough to make a triple barrel bluff bad, especially in a situation like this. We're not risking 130 bigs here, guys. We're risking 34, it's okay. We're risking about just over half pot. So what that means is that we need just over 33% fold equity to break even. So let me show you how I would really think about this spot. How much fold equity do I think I'm getting here? Do I think I'm making villain fold half the time, let's say? Maybe, probably not. If I had to guess, I would say it's more likely I get called here than I get a fold. And that's enough to put some people off, but that's okay. Villain has a lot of 6s, 7s, 8s. He still has 10s and 9s sometimes. Yeah, we block half of them, but those together are still 6 combos. Jacks, that kind of thing. A bunch of like broadways that have missed here that just had a flush draw. That kind of stuff, right? Maybe even some stuff like 8, 7. And a lot of the time, a recreational player isn't going to want to call off the rest with those hands. They're not going to want to go broke with under pairs to the board and, you know, facing 3 barrels. There's a good amount of fold equity in a spot like this, even against recreational players. One of the biggest fallacies and really annoying bugbears for me to hear as a coach is the mantra of they never fold, but they never fold. But surely there's no fold equity, but surely you don't bluff the weaker players. You know you do. Data shows us that you do bluff the weaker players. They do fold. And when you unblock the folding range, mostly like this, because you unblock the main club component that's pitching, and you only need 27%. Sorry, we only need about 35% fold equity. I think it's very clear that we have that. I think, like, if I had to guess what the fold equity is here, I would say it starts with a 4. It's in the 40s, and therefore we get more than what we need. Usually we get called, then there's like a very bad thing that happens where we start to kick ourselves and we're like, God damn it, why did I bluff? I knew I was getting called. No, you didn't. You didn't know you were getting called. You knew that you were often getting called, but as long as you're confident that for the pot odds, there'll be enough fold equity, it's okay. And let me reassure you with the data, in most spots, even recreational players, that's players whom we've filtered for in our mass data sets by using a large gap between the VPIP and the PFR, right? Basically saying, oh, they play something like an 8% gap or higher. A lot of them do fold to triple barrels more than you would think. I'm not going to show you the exact layout. That's something you get in grade E of the Carrot Poker School, the live course we're running this September. But there are hundreds of different patterns and spots we go into in this course that show you when it's okay to bluff against recreationals, against regulars. It's all there. This is the spot that's very much okay to bluff in, even though it feels a bit squeamish. This will really help your red line, getting over the fear of losing money by bluffing, getting over the shame, you know, the gut reaction of, ouch, I should never have done that, is key to fixing the red line. It really is. Grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School, the 3rd lecture of that course is all about how to think about bluffing. When are you allowed to bluff? When is it optional to bluff, and when are you not allowed to bluff? This is such an important class. When people take grade 1 lecture 3 for the first time, they often just have a mind completely blown moment. They stop worrying about whether it's okay to bluff, what equity they need, and they have a much more methodical thought process. I'm going to give you an insight into this. We're going to open the tome of how to bluff today and look a little bit at this. So first off, an example hand, a mundane spot, a common turn barrel scenario. Let's get into it. So what we have here is a very under-bluffed turn spot at lower stakes. People just don't quite understand that the criteria for what you need to be going on in your hand to be able to bluff here is just not that harsh. It's really not so strict. We've gone ahead and CBet the flop here, small against an unknown player in the big blind. We've gone ahead and barreled the turn with the Jack of Hearts, 10 of Spades. Now, this is a play that if we look this up in the solver, we're going to see that this happens very frequently, like this kind of bet. But I want to show you guys exactly why that's the case. I'm going to show you a sneak peek into the theory of bluffing in this spot. So here we have the sim and we have the turn barrel spot here, as we can see. When we hover over our hand, which is Jack 10, just say Jack 10 offsuit with a flush draw blocker, the Jack or 10 of hearts, you can see that it does bet pretty often. I don't use the overbet on this turn card when the 6 is paired on the flop. It's just something I tend to avoid. It's not a big deal though, you can overbet here. Jack 10 in general, with or without a heart, it doesn't really matter, is just going to be a hand that you want to bluff a lot with. Well, why is this? Firstly, some of Villain's more prevalent flop calls with ace-x are going to be ace-10, ace-jack, rather than the ace-3, ace-4, that the hand just has more showdown value. It's more of a continue against the flop. C-bet, so it's more likely to be the top pair sort of region that Villain actually holds here. Another reason is that we have live outs against lots of villains calling range. People really neglect this idea that when you have a jack and a 10, you have 2 overcards to a 7. If you look at villains continuance range against B75 here, it will still contain lots of hands like 9s, 8s, 7x, etc. Villain can't just get into the habit of folding all of these lest they're going to be playing like an absolute net on the turn here and just always getting out the way. Another thing that's really important to understand is EV. The in-position player here is entitled to 57% pot share in EV here. That means that the situation, the world that we're in, is significantly more favourable for the in-position player than it is for the big blind. What this means is that we don't have to uphold really strict standards about what kind of hand we're allowed to bluff with. If we zip back over to the strategy view here, we can see that almost any hand is okay to bluff with. One thing that might be a bit of a no-no is King X that blocks folding range, so something like King 5 of spades. That is really the only hand that's not able to bluff here due to being too sort of negative in terms of equity and blockers. Anything else is able to bluff here and bluff really freely and happily. Even a hand that looks like a terrible holding, something like the Queen 8 of clubs. You take a look at that hand and you think, oh, that's got nothing, I can't bluff, I need to have a gutter or I need to have hearts, these are better bluffs. This is a complete fallacy. We talk about this in the Carrot Poker School, it's called the better bluffs fallacy. Queen 8 of clubs is a worse hand than a flush draw, but it's not a worse bluff, because what makes a hand a good bluff is the difference between the EV of betting and checking. So just saying that a hand has more EV overall, no matter what it does, or less EV overall, doesn't mean that it's not okay to bluff with that hand. World favorability is the first port of call. Almost nobody that plays 10NL or 25NL understands bluffing. They have the wrong thought process. They haven't opened the tome of bluffing theory because no one's ever taught it to them properly. They've watched a bunch of streams and YouTubers and those people have, you know, they've had good intentions, but they've said something like, we have better bluffs here. We would bluff with the straight draw here. We won't bluff with Queen 8. They don't understand bluffing. And what that means is that you end up in this situation building way too weak of a checking range here, way too strong of a betting range because you're not bluffing often enough. It creates imbalance everywhere, it ruins your red line, it fails to capitalize on the favorability of this spot. If you think a spot is good for your range, stop caring about whether you have a heart. This is called the comfort blanket fallacy. I need to have a flush draw, I need to have 8-9, I need to have 10-9. No, you don't. You really don't. You just need to have air. As long as you don't bet the middle of your range in this spot, you're not making a mistake in GTO terms. If I had to guess, I would say that this spot might even be overfolded. People might fold more on the turn than they should here. Certainly if you bet and then bet river, I think that spot will be overfolded, as we talked about in number 3, right? The triple cheeseburger. It's getting closer to lunchtime. I need to move on from the sight of that burger, from the thought of it. Let's get to point number 5 now. Point number 5 is all about becoming a massive demon from another world and terrorizing the hell out of your opponents with your big glowing red face and razor sharp demonic teeth. In other words, raise CBets. It's very difficult to defend optimally once you've bet all of your range, and a lot of people have been told to simplify to betting all of their range in just about any spot you can imagine, apart from like 9-8-7 monotone or something. You know, almost all flop textures are being range bet by a very large portion of the regular demographic at 50NL, 25NL, 100NL even. Just there's a lot of betting. It's a rampant strategy. It's very popular. So let me show you a spot here where we raise a flop CBet. And I'm going to show you how we can actually do this like a bit of a maniac, but to devastating effect. So in the spot, we are in position facing about a half pot flop CBet. This is probably a recreational player. Half pot is just not a sizing you see many people use blind versus blind who are regulars at these stakes. They tend to use 1/3 or check. It's just kind of the lay of the land there. I mean, this could be a reg with a different strategy, but I think it's worth assuming that the CBet is being made a bit too recklessly and a bit too sloppily. So what I've actually done here is I've gone ahead and locked the sim, the pile sim that I'm going to show you, to just range betting as small blind. Now, I don't think that's necessarily what's happening, but there will be some recreational players who do just bet very haphazardly here and don't really think it through. So if villain is just betting range here, I'm going to show you just how much raise we're actually going to be taking to this kind of spot. So here's the raise strategy. It's 17% overall, which is an absolute ton. Now this is assuming that villain played a completely obnoxious range bet strategy here, which is not a very good idea. It's going to mean that their EV is reduced to being less than half the pot, which is not very good for a pre-flop raiser run on 983. So clearly this is a misplay, but people will do stuff similar to this. You know, this is a kind of epidemic. People are c-betting too much. With a hand like the one that we have, which is the 5-4 of spades, you can see that with any backdoor 5-4, you're able to raise here. And what this this is a low EV bluff in equilibrium. It's the kind of raise that breaks even or pretty much breaks even. Why does a solver bother doing it? You may ask if it breaks even. Well, the idea is that it doesn't want to be too value heavy when it's raising here. By throwing this hand in at 0 EV, it actually increases the EV of the top of its range, its value hands, its pocket 8s, pocket 3s, 9-8, top pair, stuff like that it's raising sometimes. So this is a mandatory part of GTO. We talk about the 5 types of flop raids in grade 3 of the Carrot Poker School, and this is very much something that's worth learning. But the exploit here, the way this will really save your red line, to get back to the topic of today's video, is that it's Villain's defense strategy against about a 4x raise here that's actually a bit counterintuitive. He's supposed to pure 3-bet all of these overpairs and actually suffers a fairly big EV loss by not 3-betting 10s here. The value that's urgent / denial that you get from 3-betting 10s just makes it a superior play to just calling the flop raise. So the fact that Villain is having to actually go ahead, the pink color here is raise or 3-bet, and do this is a massive thing. I don't think people will do this enough. Secondly, a lot of the defends that they have to make in this spot are a little bit uncomfortable, you know, having to call hands like 6s to a raise here, having to call a bunch of different gut shots and overcard backdoor combos like the king jack backdoor, king queen backdoor. I don't think it's obvious. There's some ace high here that has to call that's not obvious, like ace jack, no backdoor. I just think it's a little bit overfolded. When you see somebody bet all of their range and then the solver tells them to defend every gutter, a bunch of underpair, ace king, stuff like this, I just don't think this is always going to happen. So you may well get more fold equity here than what you need, and it's just going to put people in situations that are very uncomfortable for them when somebody merges out their range and just bets too wide on the flop in these kind of situations. The punish really is to just throw in these raises. You can make them quite small. You'll notice that I used a smaller sizing in reality here than I did in the solver, and that's because I actually think there won't be very much sensitivity to the raise size in this spot. So in this hand, Villain did call, and I ended up deciding to barrel the turn on this occasion. Sizing down slightly is a card that uncaps Villain's range somewhat compared to what it was on the flop, but that's okay. And we get the fold on the turn. But I think in general, just looking for spots where recreational weaker regs are just making too many CBets just too sloppily and raising them a lot is a great punish, and it's really gonna resurrect your red line from the pits of despair. Alright guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of fun to make, and do bear in mind this is not exhaustive. There are lots of other things you can do to save your own red line. This is just 5 ideas. Have a think about some other things that you could do. Let me know your feedback for this format. I hope you do like these classroom style hand example videos, and we'll be back with loads more of the good stuff next week for you here at Carrot Corner Poker Education. Remember to check out carrotcorner.com, in particular the school page for the Carrot Poker School, which is now live. You can pick it up over there. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Take it easy, have fun, getting fold equity and saving your red line. Bye for now.